especially with all the cover-ups and things like that, and information being so controlled,
Hmm.
and going back to the scriptures, you're definitely right. People have been talking about these things for a very long time now. You mentioned gods, and it's something I wanted to touch on, because in the ancient Slavic culture, before we were baptized or Christianized or whatever you want to call it, especially like Kievan Rus, and like that territory and stuff like that. Before Vladimir, shit, I don't know how to Vladimir the Wise, I guess you would say in English, Christianized Rus and things like that. People were Slavic societies were very much pagan, just like you said. Like the rest of the world. They had this common understanding, gods and things like that. And I remember in the last video, you kind of briefly mentioned that all these things, although they were not so good, you said something like that. It was still our own. How do you feel, and what would you say about, because like I told you in the last video, Slavic people, we had our own book called the Vedas, the Slavic Aryan Vedas, and I don't know. I'm trying to figure out if it's a problem that we have disconnected from this. I mean, like I said before, to me, Christ is the Messiah. The word and the message that Christ was that Christ presented is very very universal. It's very necessary. But still, it's like we had our own tradition, and it did talk about various different gods. Like, how do you feel about that whole thing? Because in the Slavic Vedas, it does talk about these different gods, but then it also mentions the God of gods, meaning the creator of everything. So, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about us disconnecting completely from that? I mean, obviously we touched on that before, but like you personally, don't you think that we should kind of pick back up on these traditions, or do you think that they're completely evil to believe in other gods and things like that, maybe even worship?
Mm-hmm. Well, to believe is one thing, right? Like, I know that these things are real, so therefore I do believe they're real. And the Bible never makes any qualms about these things being real. The first commandment is, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." It doesn't say there are no other gods. You see what I'm saying? So to believe, yes. To worship, no. Because the worship of these beings inevitably leads to human sacrifice, because they want blood. And they'll come as all kinds of beautiful things, and they'll have all kinds of beautiful words, and they'll teach you all kinds of great things, but inevitably it leads to some kind of perversion and human sacrifice. When you look at just the worship, whenever you had a culture that worshipped the gods, the Canaanites would call them the Baal, the Baalim. Those were the gods. That was their word for the gods. Or, the Romans had the Pantheon, or the Greeks had the Pantheon. Egyptians had theirs, and so forth. And these are just the same things being represented in different languages, and in each case you look into the text of these gods that represent these gods, the religious texts that represent these gods, and they're perverted and insane, and that's what it leads to. And the thing is, like for instance with Egypt, right, you look at the text pertaining to the Egyptian gods, right? I mean, I don't even want to go into details, but again, some insane stuff with sperm and blood, and you know what I mean. That happens, and with the Canaanites, just notorious levels of child sacrifice going on. With the Scythians, our ancestors, you had human sacrifice going on. We would take our slaves, or the people that were under us, and we would kill them with us in our burial if we were nobles to the gods, that sort of thing. You know what I mean? And that was very prevalent because the God of all gods, the creator, is represented in the scriptures, and every people's, they have a certain entity that controls them for the most part, and only the Hebrews are in a direct relationship as an entire nation with the actual creator. And his association isn't human sacrifice, perversion, insanity. It's law, it's structure, it's order, right? So I would say to anyone, if you look back at your roots far enough, it's going to go back to Ham, Shem, or Japheth. Scythians go back to Japheth. And Ham, Shem, and Japheth were all taught by Noah to worship the creator alone and to keep his laws. And we lost that understanding over time.
Okay, yeah. We talked about this in a previous video, but I've read the Slavic Vedas, and and then I read the Hindu Vedas, and if you look in indigenous people of the Americas, I'm not talking about the Aztecas, I'm not talking about the Mayans, I'm talking about native tribes. There's, how should I say, there's nothing, it speaks nothing of evil in these books. It actually speaks of like good things, and I'm having a hard time wording this, but it doesn't speak of anything evil. I mean, yes, there were supposedly people in order to summon the rain or whatever, would have different kinds of rituals and things like that, and acknowledged, let's say, gods of different things. But for the most part, it speaks of society completely living with and for the land. And I did not notice anything evil or human sacrificial in it at all.
Yeah, that's a good point, because they're Hebrews, right? Native Americans, so they actually were keeping many of the Bible laws,
like the Hopis and things like that.
I'm not sure about like specifics, but in general, like for the most part, the mass of Native Americans are related, right? And yeah, they go back to the Hebrews. So I mean, they broke the law about not worshiping other gods, but they knew laws about not doing child sacrifice, not drinking blood, which are all scriptural laws, which they kept, and they knew they were Hebrews, right? Mm-hmm. But what happened eventually was, if you look at under the 10 Commandments, right, like it's kind of like the universal law, right? And especially for the Hebrews, it's kind of like there was a contract that was made with their ancestors, and the point was, like, if you keep these laws, everything's going to be wonderful for you. But if you start straying from these laws, curses are going to come upon you. And look what happened to them, right? They lost their protection because they went to other gods, right? And the Most High God is a jealous God, basically. Like, he doesn't want you to deal with other beings. He just only wants you to focus on him, because these other beings are not what they claim to be. And because of that, they lost their protection, and I mean, they're cursed now. I mean, it's just true. I mean, for one. So, yeah, go ahead. That's pretty much it.
Go ahead. I'm sorry for one. Oh, well, so you basically saying that the same thing happens to Slavic people?
Yeah, to some degree, yeah. We are not Hebrews, but we were still given the understanding of the one Creator. Do not, the basic universal law. We were given that from Noah, and we kept that for some time until the Tower of Babel, basically. And then we were taught Nimrod's religion, and Nimrod's religion basically brought the gods over to us.